What if the future of the global economy doesn't belong to the nations you read about every day, but to a continent too often overlooked? While headlines are dominated by US-China tensions, European politics, and Middle Eastern conflicts, a quieter shift is underway, and it's happening in Africa. This is not the old, tired narrative of poverty and instability. This is about a demographic wave so massive that it could redefine the balance of power in the 21st century. By 2030, half of all new workers entering the global job market will come from Africa. By 2075, 1 out of every 3 people on Earth will be African. No other region comes close. But here's the challenge. Africa remains the poorest continent on the planet. Collectively, its 54 nations produce less wealth than Germany alone. Despite having almost 20% of the world's population, Africa accounts for under 3% of global GDP. This is the gap that must be closed if the continent is to seize its historic opportunity. The problem is centuries old. Africa's minerals, land, and even its people have been extracted for profit by others, leaving deep scars. And today, while the world is changing fast, Africa still struggles with barriers that keep its economies fragmented. Trade between African nations is shockingly low. Only 13% to 16% of their total trade is with each other. The rest is with Asia, Europe, and other regions. Experts agree. The way forward is unity, not in the sense of erasing borders, but in building an integrated economic system that allows Africans to trade, work, and innovate together. Europe has done it. Asia has done it. Africa, despite decades of talk, still lags behind. The African Continental Free Trade Area, AfCFTA, was created to change that. Signed by 54 nations, it's the largest free trade zone in the world by population and land area. In theory, it could boost Africa's GDP by over 10% and lift tens of millions out of extreme poverty by 2043. But in practice, progress is slow. Poor infrastructure, inconsistent regulations, and national priorities often block the big picture. And yet, the stakes have never been higher. The rest of the world is aging fast. Europe's median age is already in the mid-40s. East Asia's is climbing towards 60. Africa's? Just 19. This youth could be its greatest strength, or its greatest risk. Without jobs, education, and opportunities, the demographic dividend could turn into a demographic disaster. The next few decades will determine which path Africa takes, and whether the world's youngest continent becomes the growth engine of the global economy, or a source of instability no one can ignore. Africa's size and diversity are its greatest strengths, but also part of its challenge. With over 1.5 billion people, more than 3,000 languages, and 54 countries, the continent is a mosaic of cultures, economies, and political systems. This richness should be a foundation for strength. Yet in practice, it often leads to fragmentation. Trade is the clearest example. Moving goods across borders within Africa can be harder than shipping them to other continents. Crossing from Ghana into Ivory Coast, for instance, can involve phone charges higher than calling Australia. A short trip that should take hours can stretch into an entire day, thanks to outdated transport systems and complex border checks. These are not just inconveniences, they're economic roadblocks. The AfCFTA was supposed to change this by cutting tariffs on 90% of goods and creating a single market. On paper, it's transformative. In reality, it's still treated as an optional extra rather than a priority. Many countries have signed on, but haven't aligned their policies or invested in the roads, railways, and digital networks that would make free trade work. In some regions, it's still faster to import goods from China than from a neighboring African state. The cost of this disconnection is huge. When African nations trade mostly with the outside world, they export raw materials, gold, oil, cocoa, cobalt, and import finished products. The profits, jobs, and skills that come from manufacturing are lost. The pattern is as old as colonialism, and it's keeping economies vulnerable. A sudden drop in commodity prices can wipe out years of growth overnight. Some countries are starting to break that cycle. Uganda has banned the export of raw minerals, insisting they be processed locally. Botswana cuts and polishes its own diamonds before selling them abroad. Zimbabwe and Mali are taking similar steps. The logic is simple. Keep more of the value chain at home, and you keep more jobs and wealth. But economic reform on this scale requires more than good intentions. It demands investment, in infrastructure, energy, and above all, people. Africa has vast agricultural land, but still imports a huge share of its food. It has enough sunlight, wind, and rivers to power its cities, but hundreds of millions still live without reliable electricity. These gaps slow everything, from factories to classrooms, and make it harder to create the jobs that young Africans need. And time is running out. In most African countries, more than half the population is under 25. This youth could drive a new era of growth, but only if they have education, skills, and opportunities. Without them, frustration can turn into instability. Already, parts of West Africa and the Sahel have seen a rise in political unrest, with more people openly accepting military takeovers. The message from economists, researchers, and even business leaders is clear. Without integration, diversification, and investment, Africa's population boom will be a burden. With them, it could be the continent's greatest advantage. Africa's future will not be decided by numbers alone. Yes, the continent's demographics are unprecedented. More young people than any other region, and a population projected to triple by 2075. But demographics are not destiny. What matters is what those people can do, and whether their leaders will give them the tools to succeed. Right now, too many young Africans are trapped in economies that don't create enough jobs, don't offer enough skills training, and don't provide the infrastructure that businesses need to grow. The median age in countries like Niger, Uganda, and Mali is under 17. That's a lot of untapped energy. If these millions of young people can find work at home, they can lift entire nations out of poverty. If they can't, many will look elsewhere. And migration will reshape not just Africa, but the world. The stakes aren't only economic. Political instability remains a shadow over much of the continent. Public trust in governments is low, corruption is common, and too many leaders are far removed, in age, priorities, and vision, from the people they govern. The generational gap is stark. A youthful majority led by political classes often in their 60s, 70s, or even older. Without reform, that gap will grow into a fracture. Still, there is momentum. Countries like Rwanda and Morocco are showing how investment in infrastructure, manufacturing, and education can change the story. Initiatives to process Africa's raw materials at home are spreading. Renewable energy projects are starting to light up rural communities. And the AfCFTA, if fully implemented, could create the largest single market in the world, a market powered by young workers and entrepreneurs. The path forward is not mysterious. Experts have been repeating the same priorities for years. Build reliable infrastructure to connect African economies. Diversify exports beyond raw commodities. Invest heavily in education and vocational training. Strengthen governance and root out corruption. Integrate markets so African nations trade more with each other. It's a simple list, but not an easy one. It requires political courage, long-term thinking, and a willingness to put continental interests alongside national ones. The alternative is clear: an Africa that remains dependent on foreign markets, trapped in cycles of poverty, and unable to harness the most important resource it has: its people. The next decades will test Africa's leaders like never before. They will also test the patience and resolve of Africa's youth, whose voices are growing louder and more connected every day. If those voices are heard, and if policies match the scale of the opportunity, Africa can become not just a participant in the global economy, but one of its main engines. The world is getting older. Africa is getting younger. What happens next will shape the century. If you followed this far, we want to hear your thoughts. Do you believe Africa's leaders are ready to make the changes needed? Drop your answer in the comments, support our work by liking this video, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our next update.